All right, so a lot of you write in or call me and want me to do some sort of video where you have a vanity like this one that's got the built-in backsplash and also has the integrated sink. So first of all, a couple of hints when doing anything like this. Whatever finish that you do, it's gonna have to be something that can be done on a vertical surface. So a lot of the finishes that we do, where we do melded marbles or veins or things like that, on a flat surface won't work on a vertical surface. So what I like to do to get a really cohesive piece of, I guess, a project, is I like to do something on the backsplash and in the sink that's pre-epoxy, meaning that the design element and everything is on the countertop prior to me pouring the epoxy, because once I pour epoxy on the back, I really can't manipulate a design. So what I'm gonna do, one of my favorite things to do, is use foils. I've done several videos where I use foils on this type of a sink, but today we're gonna go a step farther. We're going to add into that design element, we're gonna be adding a texture medium. Now the texture medium that I use is a very, very professional line from Artistic Painting Studio, Jennifer Ferguson. It's her Artsyville line. So I will put a link in the comments below so you can find her. So basically all this is a very, very thick medium. So what I'm gonna do is once I trial this on, I'm gonna run a roller through it that's gonna leave me a really pretty design. Now, when doing this, when you start to trial, it'll take a little bit of learning curve, but you wanna trial your material on very thin. Thin definitely wins. Now, you're not gonna wanna do this with a wall mud, like you can do walls sometimes, because the thing with the wall mud is that as it dries, it's going to shrink and it'll cause the material to crack. So whatever line of texture medium that you go with, make sure that it's a professional line and you're not going to have issues once you put it on your substrate. So all I'm doing is getting it nice and level on there. All right, so then what we'll do is we'll just come up here, do the backsplash. Now, if you're doing this in place where this is obviously going to be a wall back here, you may have to get a little bit smaller trowel. These are the Japanese trowels, and they are great for laying down product. Now, right here in that crack where I'm having a hard time getting a lot of that product, I'm just going to put it on my finger and I'm going to run it through there. And then I can just come back in here and level it out. I'm not too worried about that because we're gonna have to address that little edge once we get ready to trial. Now, one thing I do like about this product is as I'm trialing it, if it starts to tack up on me, I can just mist it with a little bit of water and it'll trial right back out. And it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm not going for a flawless finish because the added texture that's in the texture medium will just add some interest into the design. Just really getting product on there. Once that product's on there, you can just level it out. And I'm not really worried about my edges at this point. I'll come back and address those a little bit later. I should have addressed this before we started, but I want to show you guys how I prepped this countertop. I came in with a very, very high grit sandpaper, 80 grit, and I sanded it really, really well. This piece was in terrible shape. So because I got it from the junkyard, basically it had some really deep cuts and scratches. So I went over the top with Bondo and I leveled it out with Bondo. I just ran a really tight coat of Bondo and I let it set up, and then I came back and sanded it smooth. So that's what you're seeing underneath here is that Bondo. Then at this point, if I were going to paint it, if I were not going to come over with the texture medium, if I was just going to paint and then go do another type of finish, I would do 2 coats of the XIM bonding primer. And then after that dries, I would come in with a regular, either a Behr paint or something like that. It's a latex paint. I would then paint it the color that I want the undercoating to be, and then go to the next step. All right, so if you are doing this in place, it is really important, if at all possible, to take your faucet fixtures off, because it's almost impossible to be able to get that pattern rolled on if you have those in place. Now, if you don't, there is a possibility that you can go in and kind of faux the design. Now, one thing that you will see on these fixtures is if you get material down into the hole, you can just wipe them out with your finger. But also what we're gonna go back and do is once we pour the epoxy, we'll go in actually with a hole saw and we'll clean up these holes as well as the hole that's down into the drain. All right, to do our edges, I'm gonna take the material and then I'm gonna actually put it onto the edge. Then I'm gonna tap it just so I can get that material on that edge. This just makes it a little bit easier. Then I'm gonna just come back and very lightly, I'll trowel it down. Now, if you're trying to create a rock type edge, you could leave it like this, actually kind of come in here and cause some texture. And then I would come and just very lightly knock it down. And you can create a really cool rock edge. And then we'll, as it dries, we'll come in and slightly sand it to make it look a little bit more realistic. But I think I'm gonna go ahead and just make this a smooth edge. All right, then I'll just take my finger and get that lip. Like I said, I'm not super worried about this because I'm going to come back with a sander and hit it once I run my pattern through it. And I love this texture medium from Artisitng. It gives you plenty of open time where you can re-roll your surface over and over again. All right, so I'm going to come in with our decorative rollers. You can get these from the same place that I get my texture medium, which is Artistic Painting Studio, and there will be a link. So this happens to be a pattern of, I think it's tiger, like a tiger skin pattern, but we have hundreds and hundreds of foil rollers or decorative rollers. I say foils because we can use these as the foils as well. All right, so I'm gonna very lightly mist it with water. So I'm gonna start at the top and I'm gonna watch this edge here, and that's gonna line up to my edge and help me do a straight line. All right, so I was telling you a little earlier to address this little voided area, what I'm gonna do is come in and I'm just gonna kind of draw that out to make it all be very cohesive. Now, you don't have to do your backsplash. You could do your backsplash in a different pattern if you wanted to, but I'm trying to get just one pattern through the whole surface. On this surface, remember when I said thin to win? I got a little bit too much product on my backsplash, so it's causing these really high peaks, which is kind of a neat look. except that I know I'm gonna be putting epoxy over this, and those high peaks I don't want. So like I said, this product has plenty of work time. So I'm gonna come back in and I'm gonna pull quite a bit of that product off to make it thinner. And therefore it won't leave as much texture when I run that roller through there. There. You only need it thick enough to make an impression from your roller. That's as thick as it needs to be. It doesn't need to be crazy. All right, so let's re-roll this top. If it starts to slide, you can just kind of start over. And you don't have to worry about this being perfect, because once we sand this and come back over with the paint, you'll never see these small imperfections. As I roll, I'm not putting a lot of pressure. I'm just kind of holding what I have, and as it rolls, that way it won't slide. All right, we're gonna dress these front edges. All right, so I've cleaned my trowel, and what I'm gonna do now is just very lightly come back and knock some of that design down. Just ever so lightly, I'm touching this. And all this is gonna do is help me later when I don't want to be doing quite as much sanding. It's just kind of made it a little smoother. When I sand it, it'll be super smooth. Same thing with the top. And you can see I really didn't change any of the pattern, just taking some of those high peaks and knocking them back down. You can also run across your pattern if it's a little easier for you to do that. The main thing is not to put too much pressure at all. If you don't feel comfortable going back and touching your pattern, that's okay. You can just wait to sand it, and then you can knock all your pattern down at that point. If you want a very muted pattern, you could actually come in here and trowel it even more and make that pattern very, very muted, very, very quiet, so it's just a glimpse of the eye. I like to do that actually with my sandpaper more than with this, because I can get a little more detailed. All right, so what we need to do is address the little voided areas in the corner where we couldn't get our pattern. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna basically just faux finish the look. I'm not at all worried about what it looks like right now, because as soon as you sand all this, it's gonna look completely different. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna come in with a little popsicle stick, and I'm just gonna kind of follow what looks like could be a pattern. And all I'm really trying to do is set something for the eye to catch. Like I said, I'm not really worried that it look exactly like the finish, because all of this unevenness here is all going to be sanded out and you won't be able to tell the difference. Come back in here, you can use a popsicle stick to kind of use that flat, and I'm just creating something for the eyes to grab a hold of. Okay, so our surface is dry, and now it's time to sand. So what I'm gonna be doing is I'm gonna sand it just enough to where I have a little bit of a texture, because the next step is gonna be painting and using some glazes. And I want some highs and lows in there, but I don't want it to be real high or real low, and also really, really rough. All right, so I'm just gonna come in here with a 220, sand it almost smooth after I turn it on. All right, so what I'm gonna do for the basin is I'll just take this off and I'll hand sand around the ledge. That way I have a little bit more control. Same thing on my edges. I don't want to burn all of that material off my edge. So I'm just going to come in very lightly. All right, so now to address the issue of right here at the bend, just going to take my sandpaper and lightly run it through the edge. Okay, so what we'll do now is we'll paint it our base coat and then we'll start some fun finishes. All right, so everything's dry. I gave it 2 coats of the Stone Coat Countertop undercoating in black. Now I'm gonna do another layer of paint and it's gonna be the hammered copper. Now you could skip the black undercoating like I did. I thought I was going to go a different direction with this countertop, but I decided to go this direction. So I'm going to come back and paint it with the hammered paint. Like I said, you don't have to do the black. You could go straight from your texture medium to your hammered paint. All right, so I'm going to come in first in the basin area, and I'm going to come in with the hammered paint. Now, the reason I'm using the spray paint in the basin is so that I don't have any brush strokes. I want to be really careful not to do that. I want my sink to be really pretty, even though we're going to kind of do another layer of detailed over the top. I want the base to be very, very clean. All right, so okay, so I'll let the spray paint dry, then I'll come back and I'll actually roll the rest of the surface with the rolled on hammered. I could do the whole thing with spray paint. It's just much easier to do it with the roller when it's on a vertical or on a horizontal flat surface. I really like the texture that the paint on hammered paint gives me. All right, so the spray paint's dry. Now I'm going to paint the rest of the surface with the hammered copper. All right, so it's been overnight. The copper paint is dry, and now you guys have been asking me to show you more foils. So we're going to take this finish and we're going to take it to the next level with our foils. So what we'll do is we'll come in and we'll paint our foil adhesive. We'll let it tacked up for about 45 minutes, and then we'll add some bling. All right, so our foil adhesive I get from Artistic Painting Studio, Jennifer Ferguson. Check out her website. I'll have the link in the description. I'm using her Artisitng line, by far the best foil adhesive I've ever used. And the reason I like it is because as I roll it out, it's gonna take about 45 minutes to get what I call tacky. And once it gets tacky, it will never not be sticky until I put a foil over it. Once I put that foil, it is no longer sticky. But I don't have a certain amount of time that I have to apply that foil. I can apply it in 45 minutes, or I can apply it next year. It's never going to dry out on me, and that's what I really like. It also sticks to everything. So I'm just going to put on a light coat. It'll dry crystal clear. Everywhere that I put that adhesive, my foil is going to stick. All right, so I'm going to come in and I'm going to brush the inside of the basin because I can't get that roller in there. if you're gonna brush it, you may have to thin it just a tiny bit with water. Okay, now comes the fun part. So we're gonna put foils down over the adhesive. Now, I said our adhesive takes about 45 minutes to get tacky. And once it gets tacky, what you'll be able to do is touch the surface. And when you bring your finger away, it's gonna be very clean. It's not gonna be sticky on your finger, but it's gonna feel like very, very sticky tape. All right, so what we're gonna do, our foil is actually metallicized onto a piece of plastic. So it's stuck on there. So a lot of people would think that we're gonna lay the shiny side, the pretty side, down and then pull it up. But actually we do the opposite. We're gonna take this side and we're gonna lay it down. And when we pull it off, it's gonna come off of the plastic sheeting. All right, so what I wanna do, I don't want 100% coverage on this finish. I want just the high part of the pattern to grab the foil. So what I'm gonna do when I lay it down, I'm not gonna scrub it really hard because I just want a little bit of this foil to come off. I'm also gonna crunch it, and this is gonna give me a really neat look when I lay down the foil. All right, so we're just gonna very lightly with our hand, I'm just gonna lay it down. Then I'm gonna get a soft cloth. And I'm just gonna rub it on there very softly. Now, I'm not gonna go all the way to the edge. If I push this rag all the way to the edge, that straight edge is gonna show in my pattern. So I wanna go about a ½ an inch or so and then stop and leave myself a little bit of salvage there. All right, so I want a little more coverage than that is giving me. So I'm gonna go back down and I'm gonna get a little scrub brush. Now with the scrub brush, it's very important that you just go in a linear pattern, that you don't scrub it. Because if you scrub it in a circle, that design is going to show up on your piece. All right, let's check this out. All right, I'm liking that a little better. I'm going to go a little harder. Okay, that is really pretty. Come right here a little bit. To get into my area here, I'm going to run it right in the middle. There we go. Now, what I also want to do is I want to come over the top with a little bit of gold. And I want to have just a little touch of gold. So anywhere there's any of that glue left from my first foiling, it'll be picked up on the second. All right, so that comes out with a little hint of the gold. A little bit more up here. All right, so that is something that you can decide how much or how little of that you want. All right, so I'm just gonna finish out. And you can use every bit of that foil. You can see anywhere I have foil left, I'm gonna put it down. All right, So we'll do this with the rest of the foil, and I'll come back with some gold. All right, so it's a good idea to go ahead and do your surface in your first color to see if you like it, or if you maybe want a little bit more of the first foil that you use before you come in with your secondary foil. I was just kind of making sure that I really wanted the gold on top. If I would not have liked that, it is very easy to fix. I would just apply more glue, and then I would go back over it again with my bronze if I don't want to add the gold. But I'm really kind of liking that gold, so I'm gonna add the gold very lightly in random areas. But I'm gonna go ahead and finish up with the bronze, and then we'll go back to the gold. Now I can even go back over the gold right now with this bronze, and if there's any sticky spots left at this point, it'll grab a hold of the bronze. I can see that it's really not wanting to stick. So that tells me that just about all of that glue has been taken. So yeah, I don't feel anything sticky. All right, so let me get the gold. So if you see any color left on your plastic, you can use that plastic until it's completely off. All right, so now comes the basin. So I really do like the combination of the two foils. And don't limit yourself to two foils. You can put as many different color foils as you want. You can even put a foil down that has a pattern on it and bring one more level of interest to your finish. Okay, it's time to do the basin. So we're gonna give this a little bit different look. We're gonna take the foil, again, we're gonna crunch it, and this time we're actually gonna pounce to pull the foil off the plastic. Okay, so all the foil is on. The adhesive, there's no more sticky spots because the adhesive has taken all of that away. Now I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna take the brightness of these foils down a little bit by applying a antiquing glaze. This will also take away any of the last little bit of stickiness that you may have on your surface. Now, I'm showing you this, guys, in very bold foil colors so that it comes through good on the camera. You could do this in light colored foils. There's some beautiful pearlized foils that you can use. Any thing you can think of. There's just, the combinations are endless. You don't even have to roll the texture medium if you didn't want to. If you wanted it just to be a nice flat surface, you could do this on a flat surface. I just wanted to add one more dimension of the design, and that's why I rolled on the texture medium. All right, so let's add some glaze. I'm just using Rust-Oleum decorative glaze. You can get this at Lowe's. And let's see here. So I'm just gonna lay that color down, and you can see it's going down into the low area of my design. It's also knocking down that really brightness of that gold, which I really like. Now you can also come in here with a black glaze, would be really pretty. I'm just coming in with the brown. And now you can see how it's kind of taken that really bright and it's kind of softening it a little bit, and then the dark glaze is getting into all the low-lying areas. Now, if you wanted it to be really a darker color, you can come back with your glaze and then just not pull quite so much off. It's just a soft cotton. If I just wanted to kind of pull a little bit of that glaze off, you can do that as well. Now you can see there's more of that glaze in the low areas. And I kind of like that heavy glaze look, so I think that's what I'm gonna do. Let's go ahead and do the basin. Same thing, just gonna rub that glaze in there. I'm just gonna stipple it. By stippling it, you also create a little bit of a visual texture. This is a great method if you have a substrate that has some surface imperfections. This is a great way to be able to cover up those imperfections and still be able to use your sink. All right, I really like that. All right, so you can see the difference. This has our glaze and this doesn't. Most glazes have a pretty long open time. You'll just need to kind of check your product direction sheet and see how long you have to work the product. Most glazes have a good hour or so open time. Usually the least expensive types of glazes have the shortest amount of open time. This would really look pretty also with a black glaze. Would give a little bit different look on the surface. All right, so we'll let our glaze dry. It's very important that you let this glaze dry 100% before you pour your epoxy. So I'm gonna give it a couple of hours and then we're going to pour. All right guys, so I'm gonna mix up equal parts of part A and B of the regular Stone Coat Countertop Epoxy. If I'm using white, I wanna come in with the Stone Coat Countertop Art Epoxy instead of the regular epoxy. The Art Epoxy has a lot more UV protection. Now, usually we recommend 3 ounces per square foot for a countertop. On the first coat, which is what we're fixing to do, I'm only mixing up 1 ounce per square foot. And that's gonna give me the ability to paint everything on and it to go ahead and cure, level out. Then when I come with the second coat, it's gonna fill in any of the other voids and I'll have a glass-like finish. All right, so let's go. Okay, so time to pour the epoxy. If you guys are doing this in place, it's super important that you make sure that your plumbing is unhooked. You can also come underneath there and tape a plastic bag or something, or even put a bucket, something that's gonna catch whatever epoxy is gonna fall down through either the drain or the faucet holes. Now, as this starts to build up, it may shrink the size of your holes, and that's not that big a deal because what we do is come back in with the hole saw and we'll just drill these holes out as well as the hole in the drain, and it really does clean it up. Because we have a vertical surface, we know that the epoxy is going to continue to slide down. That's why it's very important to do your finish before you put your epoxy as far as your design. That way it doesn't run. All right, so what I like to do first is just to paint on my backsplash, knowing that it's going to run down and pool along this edge here. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll actually just paint this part first. I'll mix up just enough epoxy to do the backsplash, and I'll just do the backsplash first by itself. As the epoxy continues to run down and gather right here in this void, I'll just pick it back up and I'll run it back up the vertical surface. Now you can just keep doing this and babysitting it until it becomes thick enough that it doesn't continue to run down. Now I could stop right here, let this set up for a good 12 to 15 hours. And then I could come back and do the whole sink or the whole vanity. And whatever material I have here, even though it makes it a little unlevel at this point, once I pour my flood coat over the entire surface, all of this is going to be very smooth. So that's another way you can do it if you don't want to do it all at the same time. Do your backsplash, even come in here and do your sink. Once both of those have dried, then you'll come back and do it again and pour everything on the flat surface. Now, by doing it like that, where you let this sit up overnight, you're gonna get another level, or another layer, I should say, of epoxy in your sink area, which is gonna make it super durable. So that is actually my recommendation, is to do exactly what I'm doing here. Do your vanity, or do your basin, and do your backsplash. Let that set up at least until it's tacky. That could be 10 to 12 hours. Then you can come back, reapply again. Now that's going to give you 2 good layers of epoxy on your vertical surfaces. And then you'll pour the rest of the product. So as this starts to fall, just going to come in and recoat that on there. Eventually this is going to be thick and it's going to quit running. So because of time constraints, I'm not going to let this set. I'm going to go ahead and do the whole surface. Now you don't have to do this part with a paintbrush. You can use your hand if you want. I just gonna go ahead and use a brush. I can be a little more controlled over where I put the epoxy, and also I can make sure it's getting down in all the grooves. Now, because this is a textured surface, it is gonna require 2 coats of clear so that you don't feel that texture. That's another reason we sand the texture at the beginning, is so that our highs aren't so high that they stick or they come up through the epoxy. All right, so I've got the surface painted. Like I said, I can come back, kind of babysit it a little bit. As the epoxy runs down into this little void, I can just keep picking it up, bringing it up on the side until it gets to the point where it's thick enough where I don't believe it's running anymore. Same thing with my basin. Now I'm going to try to use as little heat as possible. The more heat that I use on this, the more my epoxy